Welcome everybody to BAMEOTUK podcast on YouTube. It feels like we've had a very busy few months over the summer, doing lots of things. I brought together two of our affinity groups, BAMEOTUK and LGBTQI plus OTUK, and Steve Ford, CEO of the Royal College of Occupational Therapists, which I'm going to abbreviate to Archot, for some real talk about what next. What are we going to do next? So before we start, I think if it would be okay, folks, if you could introduce yourselves, that would be really helpful for our viewers. So I'm just going to go with whoever's on my view panel. So Hannah, you're first.
Hi everyone, my name is Hannah Spencer. My pronouns are they and them. I'm an occupational therapist. I work in mental health in the Midlands, and I'm here on behalf of the LGBTQIA plus OTUK group.
Kwaku, you're next.
Hi, my name is Kwaku. My pronouns are he and him. I'm an occupational therapist working with young men in a prison setting, and I'm representing the BAMEOTUK group today.
Steve.
Yeah, hi, I'm Steve Ford. He, him. I'm the chief executive at Archot, and I've been in post for, I don't know, I think it's 4 months now.
Yes, and what a 4 months it's been, Steve. Rachael.
I'm fine, it's really having fun.
My name's Rachael Daniels. I'm an occupational therapist currently working in physical health in the Midlands, and I am here as a representative of the LGBTQIA plus OTUK group.
Thank you, Rachael. And my name's Mushra Ahmedlandiou. My preferred address is Mish. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm also part of BAMEOTUK. So I think, like I said, we're going to have some real talk about, following on from the very successful Archot 2021 conference. And this weekend, we had the Disrupt OT Summit, which was very successful and very well attended for a novel summit. And I'm going to start with my first question. And Hannah, I might go to you first with this question. What was the take-home messages from the Archot conference for you? And has it started any change actions personally or at where you work or any other organization that you might be attached to?
I think the one thing that Archot conference this year reiterated to me was appetite and a sense of community and real. So I guess in a kind of unique position, I spoke on the inclusion panel at conference, and the response that I personally had to that. So I was there representing the LGBTQIA plus OT group, and the response that I personally had to that was immensely overwhelming. But how affirming is that in itself? That our community want action. So yeah, I think that was my takeaway.
Yeah, action. Definitely, that's a repeating noise that I'm hearing across our affinity groups, but also across the membership in the UK and globally. What about you, Kwaku?
So I've actually been thinking about this a lot recently, following the conference, because there was a lot, and I haven't had time to go back to it, to listen to it, to some of the different sessions that I missed. One of the conversations that I've heard people have been having, which probably aligns with me as well, is now this is something that we can't miss. We can't miss the opportunity that has been highlighted massively on a national level to bring about some form of discussion, some form of change, some form of equity, something tangible rather than just leaving it as a talking shop discussion. So I think that's one of the things that I've been thinking about now, and recently, just maybe a couple of weeks prior to this the summit that you just mentioned that happened on the weekend, I've been thinking about how, if there is an appetite amongst occupational therapists to actually do that, and it got me thinking, and maybe Rachael can add in a little bit, but obviously that's from your perspective as well. But I was thinking how perhaps some occupational therapists from maybe in a mental health setting, who tend to have a little bit more time to get to know the people that they're working with, might be the ones that have more appetite for this, rather than people that might be working in a predominantly physical setting that might think, actually, it's not really affecting me. So I've been thinking about that, and obviously that then puts a bit of a, because we need the whole profession to do it. We don't need part of it to do it. We need everyone to do it. So I was just thinking about who in the profession has the appetite for it, but it's just definitely something that cannot be missed, because it's just been highlighted so massively over the last 18 to 24 months.
I guess Rachael, Kwaku invited you in.
Thank you, Kwaku. So I guess, like Hannah and Kwaku, for me, the take-home message was really that the need for the affinity groups was really solidified. I think us as kind of founding members of the groups had identified that need. But on a much wider scale, that was acknowledged kind of during the conference and also post-conference. So that was definitely a take home for me. And on the other note, Kwaku, I think you've hit the nail on the head, so to speak, in a lot of ways. I know through conversations that I have had with various occupational therapists working across the mental health and physical health settings, that there does seem to be a bit of a narrative that it's not necessarily as essential in a physical health setting to increase awareness around anti-racism work, anti-discrimination work, because generally the interventions are a lot shorter, I think, is a lot of the justification behind that. But my kind of go-to answer for that is, very early on in our education, we're taught to look holistically. That's what we do. That's our unique selling point. So actually, we have to consider everything, whether we're involved for 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year. And I think kind of, you're right, Kwaku, it does need to be across the profession. There can't be this divide between physical health and mental health.
That's interesting. Steve, what's your take on that question?
No, it's a really interesting question, and obviously, this is my first conference, and I heard a lot of people saying this felt really different and really urgent and kind of collective, I think, in terms of this kind of desire for change. I found that really powerful. But it's interesting because I have been, I set myself this challenge of 100 conversations in 100 days, and I think it's now probably about 130 in 130 days. I'm not sure, but it's been really interesting, actually, how the whole question of kind of inclusion and the need for change in so many different ways, actually, has just come up as a really kind of powerful narrative. So I don't think the conference actually was suddenly about announcing something new. I get the sense that it was a sort of culmination of lots of kind of thinking and activity and activism and all of that. So I think, so to me, it was great that actually, maybe for the first time we all got on the same page through that kind of collective experience. And I think that was really encouraging. And, I do know that, there's been lots of criticism of Archot and I can see why some of that is justified, but just internally, actually, as much as kind of externally, these conversations are taking place and people are really kind of pushing and advocating for change. So, for me, it does all seem to be kind of joining up and aligning, and I think that's a really powerful place for us to be.
Thank you, Steve. Kirsty, are you joining us from AbleOT UK?
Hey there, yes.
I'm just going to add my reflections because I attended the RCOT conference, and I think I've put in abstracts many times into it, and this is my first time after 26 years to actually get one abstract accepted, but also get two accepted. So I had two sessions there, and as I was looking at the sessions, I thought, oh, they're different. They're not all about equality and diversity. But I listened to nearly most of them. I've still got a few yet to listen to, but they all had that theme of looking for equity, looking for justice, which I found so different. That was what was really coming through for me. That's not what I've experienced before when I've attended RCOT live, the conference is live, but this was definitely, and I don't know if it was because it was a virtual platform, I don't know, that could be a contributing factor, but definitely there was this real, like you said, Steve, urgency to embed equity and justice in the profession right now in the UK. And I felt that coming through every one of those poster presentations from the different topics that were being presented, there was this theme coming through all the time. And that was just very different, very different. And there was a sense of we all want to belong to the profession. And there was a sense of, you know what, we want Archot to be a good leader for us as well. So that was coming through as well through the presentations. So yeah, definitely refreshing, inspiring, engaging. And I don't think I could have added those three words to past RCOT conferences that I've attended. Definitely. Thank you. I'm going to move on to the next question. Thank you, Kirsty, for joining us. We thought AbleOT UK wouldn't be joining us, but we're really happy that you could come and represent. Thank you so much. And maybe, if it's all right, could I ask you the second question first, if that's okay? How could the Affinity networks, the Archot membership, the specialist sections and Archot work together and separately to embed anti-racism, anti-discrimination, equity and justice into the professional DNA, if you like?
Yeah, this is a really good question, especially around sort of, you know, the idea of the affinity networks, where we fit in the grand scheme of the OT family, let's put. And I think we've kind of discussed as AbleOT with RCOT around sort of being critical friends, really. So the option to kind of look at, you know, development of policies and processes, and see how sort of disability is considered within that, and accessibility around accessing events and things like that for specialist sections and RCOT conference and, you know, everything.
Thank you. Kwaku, would you like to answer that question?
Yeah, I can have a go at it. I mean, I'm not really sure how RCOT works, and then that's probably something, a bit of ignorance on my part, and I would put my hands up to that. I don't really know how it works in terms of the structure of the organization. I just know that I go to them for my resources. If I need any, I'll go to the website and look for stuff. But apart from that, I personally don't feel like I need to pay for a specialist section on top of my monthly membership. I think that's a bit too much, when you can form different networks, even just via social media. So that's one thing for me. But then again, I haven't been to a specialist networks sections to know what kind of extra benefits I'll get from that. In terms of the affinity groups and the working relationships with Archot, that's obviously a little bit blurred, and we, from a BAMEOTUK perspective, we had a little bit of a to and fro with the RCOT following the unfortunate death of George Floyd and the eruption of the Black Lives Matter movement. Well, when we felt that perhaps the leadership wasn't there at the time. And it's really frustrating sometimes when I think about the Archot personally, because I think everyone wants them to be the shining light and really, really good and not perfect. No, nothing's perfect in this world, and nothing is. But we really want to be proud of the person that leads us. Just like that's when you have a really nice manager or a really good leader, you think, oh my gosh, I really want to be like this person. And the frustration comes in that it's very much a reactive organization, whereas it should be quite proactive, in my opinion, from the knowledge of occupational therapy that we know, and about thinking about social justice and access to a meaningful activities and all that stuff that we talk about, occupational therapies. I would have thought that our leader, our shining light organization would be quite a proactive organization. I feel like perhaps it wasn't back then, and I hope that change is coming. But in terms of the working relationships with them, I'm not sure what we, the BAMEOTUK UK, the relationship that we would like to go forward with them, because we haven't quite struck the balance yet, because I think people are still feeling it, reeling from the events that happened 12 months ago. So at the moment, probably from the BAMEOTUK perspective, we're probably trying to concentrate on making sure that we look after ourselves first before we look after other people. The adjective of put your mask on first before you help others. I think that's the direction that we're trying to do. Make sure we set our foundations first, make sure people feel confident in themselves, confident in able to speak up when things go against them, know exactly who to contact when something goes wrong. So yeah, I think following on from the conference has given us that little bit of motivation, extra motivation to kickstart and really form a good foundation for us before we then reach out to another organization or look up to our manager sort of to sort of help us lead the way.
Thank you, Kwaku. Yeah, I mean, we've got about 15 months of history now with Archot and BAMEOTUK UK, and it's been a bumpy ride, shall we say, in a very nice way. Yeah, so we've been traumatized, and we can't hide from that. The members have got trust issues now, but I feel like the Archot conference opened a window of hope and opportunity, which definitely went through our members, and I think that's the positive. But the trust has been compromised and damaged with the 15 months of what had happened in the past, but we're trying to move forwards as well. But we definitely have to look after ourselves because of the embodiment of trauma this constant battle brings for all of us in the affinity groups. Rachael, over to you.
I think first and foremost, one of my kind of strongly held beliefs is that it's important that each of our affinity groups maintains its own identity. I think there's members of each group and those of us that intersect that will share similar but also very different experiences, and it's good to capture those within the individual affinity groups so that people that are sharing similar experiences can have that time together in a safe space. That having been said, I also think that there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration. So, for example, the joint microaggressions webinar that all three of us as affinity groups are hosting next week, actually, I I think that's a great opportunity. All of us within those groups will have experienced or witnessed microaggressions, and so it kind of makes sense that we look at that as a collective. You know, ultimately, I guess what I'm trying to say is, as affinity groups, we kind of all have our own agendas, but ultimately our agendas are all underpinned by a wanting to embed anti-racism, anti-discrimination, equity and justice within our practice, and also with those that we work with in terms of colleagues, service users, patients, however you like to refer to them. And a side note for that, for me, how kind of I see this working is perhaps some joint working with Archot, because, you know, it has to be acknowledged they can reach a far greater audience, I think, than we can as individual affinity groups. But ultimately, the one thing that really sticks out for me is education, and that we need to start embedding all of these principles in occupational therapy education, because that's where the occupational therapy journey begins. So if we embed it early, we're not having to potentially try and change practices or fight against stigma and traumatization that's already occurred, when that could have been addressed much earlier on. And I guess that we've got the three, you know, members of the three affinity groups here this evening, and whether it's that kind of we look to create some videos that could potentially be played to students, or, you know, how that would work, I'm not entirely sure, but I think there are people out there that are willing to put their head above the parapet, so to speak, and speak about their experiences to try and stop the trauma moving forward.
Thank you. Some excellent points raised there, Rachel, about starting with education, about how do we then share those education materials on what platform and how we do it, and how to start kind of disrupting the trauma that starts, as Marmot says, as soon as you're in that woman's belly. Yeah, so it's interesting. So disruption definitely is the urgency thing right now, definitely.
Yeah, no, I think this is such an important question. I think one of the things I just think of when these kind of questions are framed is, what is Archot? Is Archot the kind of, I don't know, 80 members of staff who used to work in the London office but now are sort of home-based, or is it actually the 35,000 members with their collective experience and lived experience and expertise and all of that? And my view actually is it's the 35,000 people. I think that to me is really kind of vital. And so, you know, that's why at the conference, when I started to describe some kind of strategic priorities, I talked about that kind of sense of movement and community. And I think that's what I want to kind of build into the thinking here. You know, I listened to Kwaku and you, Mish, talk about, you know, the pain and the trauma of the last kind of 15 months, and you know, that's shocking, and I kind of, you know, apologize massively for that. But how do we work in a way that just prevents that kind of stuff ever happening again? Because, you know, somehow the connections that you have into the kind of you know, collective body are much more powerful, and we much more quickly and readily hear kind of voices. We have forums to kind of work things through. You know, where appropriate, you know, groups can kind of help us with formulating responses and stuff. So I just think that what we need to do, and you know, we're talking about some kind of mechanisms for doing this, but I think it's, you know, really promoting the affinity networks and seeing them as a kind of core part of our RCOT infrastructure. I think it is about making sure that we've got really good mechanisms for kind of co-producing with groups as well, so that you know, we can really kind of support the activities that you're doing, and just kind of integrate all of that into a program. So I think it is about, you know, developing strategies and programs, and you know, me making sure that we put kind of resources behind all of that. You know, I think some of this kind of community stuff won't happen instantly, but you know, there is a real commitment to invest money in the kind of platforms that we need to enable people to much more readily find their place within Archot and find their networks and their support. You know, I think the whole kind of specialist section model is a bit kind of clunky, as we've perhaps already kind of described. So yeah, that's, you know, I think, I mean, we just had a staff meeting today, and we actually reflected a bit on the kind of George Floyd murder and our response. And it's, you know, the hierarchy of the organisation. You know, it takes us about 3 weeks to make a decision. And you know, that sounds as if I'm being kind of critical. You know, I wasn't around then. You know, people would have said exactly the same about Parkinson's UK's response when I was the chief executive. So I'm not, you know, I'm not saying that it would have been any different if I'd been around last year. But I just think that's, yeah, I hope that's kind of helpful, and I hope we can, you know, I really, you know, that trust point you make, Mish, I think is really powerful, and I don't want to trivialize that and say let's draw a line, or, you know, because that's too simplistic. But you know, I really hope with, you know, the leadership of people on this call and others, we can really kind of rebuild some of that trust and relationships, and kind of, you know, move forward in a way of kind of co-leadership, co-production, and, you know, and maybe Archot, you know, as a kind of organization and a staff body, maybe our time is to lead sometimes, but I think a lot of the time it's just to convene and facilitate, actually, and that's what I hope we can do.
Thank you for that, Steve. I'll be honest, our first meeting was bumpy. I didn't like it at all. But I think what you showed when the community came together and we said that we can't carry on like this, you actually showed your allyship and your, you know, compassionate leadership. And we started looking at you in a different way. Like, actually, maybe this guy is going to listen, you know, he is going to maybe listen to what we're saying and understand the kind of struggle and the pain that comes with trying to get justice and equity. So that was quite different, if you like, a different experience. So yeah, and then I guess the Archot conference and what you kept saying through that idea of transformation, we can't just say change, it's transformation, and that's a different message as well. You know, that's about proaction, but we've got to get that justice and equity. As you can see, we keep saying that through all the affinity groups. Justice and equity is fundamental to bring back trust, to reduce the continued trauma of struggle. You know, it's important that we keep that at the forefront of that transformation. Hannah, over to you.
Oh, I don't know what keeps going on with my video. I'll just talk.
Just talk.
Pulling some of those things together. The thing I have written down in big bold letters underlined on my page is collaboration with not for or to, with Archot as an organisation, with each other as affinity groups, with allies, because like you've emphasised, Mish and Kwaku, Rachael, Kirsty, all of us have emphasised that the work that we've done and the personal cost of that work as well has kind of rippled as well. We're all tired. We need our allies to step up. But also that notion of this work that we're doing is the responsibility of all of us, wherever we're at in our career. And I think to move forwards, we have to remove some of the barriers that we throw in our own way as a profession. And some of that is around, so I speak as a relatively recently qualified occupational therapist, but not as young as I look. So I bring experience in different dimensions, I guess. But there is a bit of a perception that your voice is only valid when you've got experience. But sometimes that experience is not your professional experience, it's your life. But similarly, I also really value the student perspective. going off that point, I guess, Mish, you spoke about hope and opportunity. Hope and opportunity are both words that sing of the future. And when we think of the future, we think of our future workforce. That's the student generation, isn't it? So I will be honest, I stepped in today as a last minute substitute for a student voice. Our students are juggling so much at the moment, aren't they? They juggle their workload, they juggle their placement, and being a student on placement is exhausting. So I absolutely have full respect to the students that are willing to join us on this kind of journey that we're all on. But the student voices that I've heard as well have also acknowledged that kind of disconnect between students and Archot. They don't know what Archot do, and I guess they want to see that visible change and visible action. So I guess my points would be collaboration, visibility, and moving our barriers in terms of perception out of the way, because we're all united as humans. That's what we are. But also, I also like to kind of praise Archot as well. You know, there's been plenty of Archot bashing over recent months, hasn't there? But I, for one, have seen and felt it change, kind of going off what you said yourself there, Mish, but also in simple things like I mentioned pronouns at conference. Pronouns are something that are really important to me. Pronoun, a 4-letter word, validates my identity. And I've started to see in email signatures from Archot pronouns. And that's a change that I've noticed. And it shows that we're listened to. And as well with the themes for conference as well, the themes were chosen by the members, not by this kind of hierarchical structure, I guess. And it's that rippling effect of collaboration and with, not for or to.
I think you make a very good point about the people. The structures listening, and like I said before, I don't really know how the structures work, because I can just imagine that there's people, employees of Archot, who are just as frustrated as everyone else, but because of the procedures and stuff around it, decision can't be made really quickly, or someone has to wait for the next meeting that happens in January before a decision is made, and this is business, and that's why Steve is a CEO and I'm not. But that's how you guys do. But yeah, these things are very frustrating, and I can just imagine if there are occupational therapists working at Archot and they've experienced similar things whilst we're in the field, they'll be feeling similar things even. But I just don't know where that change is gonna come from, and I know changes takes time. It's not overnight, especially when we're talking about justice and equity, and these conversations have been going on for years and years and years. But it's true, I do feel like there's a little bit of a shift, and that little bit of a shift is better than the lack of movement that we might have had maybe 6-8 months ago, when there was not much going on. Even simple things like I can see, I know social media is not the end all, but I can sense that there's a shift in even how the RCOT are using their social media now, just more to communicate and contact connection with the members, and all these things make a difference. These little things make a difference, especially when you talk about the student voice as well. Because the younger generation, not the people that have gone late into the profession, the younger generation, the 18 to 21-year-olds who are going to university, they've known that since they were born, the internet age, and a lot of things, they see what's going on in the world. And when I speak to students now, you can tell that some of that learning is coming through. So even that engagement through social media is very, very important for the perception of the profession as a whole.
That's so important. I mean, the thing is that change comes from the top, the leadership, which then influences the culture, and I keep saying about my PhD because that's really in my head at the moment, but mine's about service improvement. I know people go, what? Aren't you doing anything about justice and equity? But I love service improvement. And the thing about service improvement is that it's about the what they say about the deliverers, which is the people inside Archot, and the receivers, which is the membership. And there's got to be a good collaborative, co-creative, co-productive relationship for that organization to be part of the people that it serves. And it's about what is happening for the Archot staff as well, not just the membership, because it is a kind of symbiotic relationship, I guess, and we've got to see what's happening there. And I know that's changed, because at the beginning it was a lot of defensiveness, but now people are starting to understand that what I'm saying, or what Kwaku's saying, or what Hannah's saying, or what Rachael's saying, or what Kirsty's saying, is not about attack. It's about really wanting change, and to say this is the lived experience. And it's not about attacking, it's about, look, this is what I'm experiencing, this is what's happening. And I'm coming to you because I do want to work with you. I don't want to just attack you. I see you as the leader of occupational therapists of the UK, Archot as an organisation. So why wouldn't I want to work with you, and for you to reach out to more people than I as an individual could, or any of the affinity group members could, or even the affinity groups. So even that, there's a bit of a change there as well, that, when we're speaking, just pause for a minute and understand we're not speaking from attack, we're speaking from experience. And the reason we're speaking in your organizations, because we want to work with you, we want to create just change. And one of the things my students said to me was, well, I can't believe you've been around for so long and we're still in the same place as the 1960s. And I was a bit like, a bit upset about that. But the truth is, change hasn't happened. It hasn't moved on. And that's why we're saying it's urgent for change to start. Not the end of change. Change will always happen. That's a constant. But for change, the just change to start. I think that's what we're looking for in the affinity groups, and, to work with Archot as well. And there is a shift, and we are acknowledging that, but we don't want to sit on our laurels with that. We want to work and move forward, because, the fact that Archot funded Disrupt OT, one person on Disrupt OT, and AOT didn't, that says a lot about where they are on that justice equity spectrum. They want to be there and they want to work with us. That says a lot. And I think we should capitalize on that together as well. And the separate groups, I appreciate the separate groups, because the LGBTQIA plus OTUK group gave me a space to say my truth about my sexuality, which I wouldn't say in the BAMEOTUK group, because I don't feel that's safe to say it in there. But I do feel safe in BAMEOTUK to talk about anti-racism, anti-discrimination, and those kind of things. So those different groups have different things for me, different needs for me, and I need those separate groups. I fall into the disability group as well. Oh, it's the joy of being old, but you just can go everywhere, claim your spot in all the places. But and again, that launch of the Able OT UK group was fantastic, because I was like, there are people like me in there, with chronic illnesses that create disability, and it's not just about this visual or hidden. Really interesting and really useful to be part of that group and to claim a seat there as well. But yeah, and there's so many opportunities separately. We have our own identities, our own visions, but together with Archot, we could be a great co-productive, co-creative entity, and we need to capitalize on that, and we need to capitalize on that urgently. I don't know what you think. Over to you. Hello, Sam.
Yeah, if it's okay, I'll just come in, just bringing us back as well to the populations that we serve, and why this is important for them as well as us, because anything that happens in OT is an example of what happens to everybody out in the real world as well. So having done lots of long COVID advocacy recently, that constant fight for kind of recognition is perhaps easier for us in the long COVID community because it's new, and we're not having to break down things that are already there, although we are because they've built up quickly, surrounded by existing systems. And yeah, I think it's really important for our affinity groups to also consider the patient service user population reserve voice as well within that, because quite often we do occupational therapy to people, and that needs to change as well. I think we need to work with people that we work, that we serve. So sorry, it didn't express that very well because I've got brain fog.
No, that you did express it really well.
Hi everyone, lovely to see you all. It was just a really quick point, just about the capabilities of all things digital at the moment. I was hoping to raise, just in terms of listening to some of our colleagues and the journeys that they've been through and they're going through at the moment, in terms of accessing jobs. And it's just really it's really struck me that we need to be advocates for our own colleagues, in terms of them having accessible jobs, having clear paths to jobs that are accessible for them. And I don't know, I guess it's really opened my eyes recently that some people are having great difficulties getting accessible jobs as an OT. And it's not something that I'd really thought through enough. And I think we need to be doing quite a bit in terms of signposting, really, and showing that it is possible to get accessible jobs for when students qualify. I don't know if that resonates with anybody, but just hearing a couple of colleagues' stories recently, and that really overlaps for me in terms of the digital capabilities that we have as a profession, and the technology that's out there at the moment. It's, as we've seen over the past year and a bit, it is possible to work from home. It is possible to work in very different circumstances. And I just I can't help but think there's almost like a body of work there, to be an advocate for our colleagues, but also to explore the potential of what we can do in traditional roles rather than what we can't. So I think there's a bit of I've heard quite a few colleagues recently talk about quite a lot of barriers that they've come across within working in traditional job settings in terms of accessibility and the health conditions. But it just feels like there's a body of work around that, and I don't know if that's being considered at all.
Yeah, Sam. I mean,
Hiya.
Hi. I mean, I had a really powerful conversation with someone who had just newly qualified, but some quite significant challenges that she's living with, and just the impossibility of getting a part-time band 5 job, for example. I mean, just and the kind of messages that she'd been given around that. No solutions, but that sounded to me like a really challenging issue that we need to address. For her, but actually for the profession, there's someone who has got some great skills and enthusiasm for the role who's kind of excluded.
I think that's the thing that's missing at the moment, Steve, if you don't mind. I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but are those sort of role models, I guess, those individuals that have found a way, or that have been helped to find a way to shine. And it doesn't have to be full-time work, does it? It can be part-time work, it can be a couple of hours a month, whatever is manageable for that individual. But I think as a profession, we're missing sort of the advocacy of those role models from our colleagues.
That's that came up in the BAMEOTUK UK launch as well, didn't it, about having role models that students and people, not even students, people before that, people pre coming into the profession, know that there are people like them that are OTs, and I think that's really important, that happens.
Sam, it almost feels like there's a RCOT piece of work needs doing about where are the accessible jobs, for the first thing, like almost like a list of a survey of where are the accessible jobs and who could be the spokesperson for that occupational therapy job in that organization. Because I certainly have seen that in organizations, although there is the equality law, we know that, but we also know it's not completely fit for purpose, that people are still discriminated even if they get the job, because the access to work isn't fully put in place, or the culture doesn't enable or accept that person with disability. So there are lots of still quite a lot of cultural hurdles and process hurdles that still limit people. And although Georgia, I interact with on Twitter quite a lot, Georgia Vine, is quite a visible role model. And I don't see it as a practice as usual kind of thing. It's always like exceptional, or it's kind of hard work, we have to put in things, instead of it being practice as usual, that everybody's welcome and we have to make the adjustments as required, and not just in education, once you get into your job as well.
I think it's just really struck it home over the past year. Like I volunteered to do tier 2 test and trace, and that was a role that I did at home doing digital working. The speed that happened, and the speed that I was able to do homework in and get set up, and all the systems that were involved for that, that exists. Homeworking exists. We know there's huge accessibility features within existing software. It like you say, I completely agree with you, because I think it is a whole body of work that we're missing. We haven't got the advocacy because the body of work's not been done, but it's almost like careers events for our profession. So you qualify as an OT, but our profession, our colleagues need to know what is an accessible job role. Can they homework if they want to go for a job within the NHS or within social services? It's really basic information, really, isn't it? It's really, really
And
basic
if occupational
information.
therapists can't sort this out, who is? I mean, isn't this where occupational therapists should be? Isn't this what your whole approach and skills and strategies and mindset of?
But we work in organisations that
I understand that
sometimes block
us
being able to do that. So that's the challenge, I think. But yeah, we should be leading the way. We definitely definitely should be.
I think one of the things that from this conversation that no one predicted COVID. We hope we wish it never came along. And obviously prior to that, definitely there was still accessibility issues anyway. So we can't hide from that either. But one of the things that other countries, or let's say America, do, and I know their whole OT structure is very, very different anyway, but they are quite ahead in their telehealth type of provision. Places like America and Australia. So perhaps if occupational therapy wanted to pick up on that, due to the fact that unfortunately we've had COVID and is really pushed forward the technologies that we do have access to, and how we can actually work from home without being where we're meant to be all the time, definitely is a piece of work that can be taken forward and pushed forward, and say we could be the leaders in this kind of field of healthcare, rehabilitation healthcare, or all that type of stuff. I think we can definitely lead the way in that, as opposed to not sitting back and not really doing anything and fighting with the big organizations that some of us work for, who like to put up a lot of barriers for things to happen. But yeah, definitely a very good point that you raised, Sam.
Well, look, we've got more able OTs joining us. Natalie, hello. I think there's some interesting thoughts coming up, and thank you, Sam, for bringing that up, because and I see it on social media and in discussions as well, in meetings, that COVID-19 is unpleasant, but the way we've been able to adjust and change so rapidly means that that was always there. We could have done that before.
We could have done it before, and
we didn't need to work like this, my political thing, capitalism, neoliberalism, all that kind of stuff that makes us make more, do more, be seen by the manager that you're working hard, being right in front of them in the office or in the organization, when actually we're so much more healthy and productive in having that kind of flexible approach of, yes, being in the organization, but also working from home as well. And it's so much better for the environment as well, which is also very important.
I think it's supporting that narrative, isn't it, for our colleagues who may need more in terms of flexible working. We need to support that narrative that even though the phases of the pandemic are changing, and however you see it, at the point where we're more past the pandemic, you can see it already in conversations and on Twitter, people talking about returning to normal or returning to face-to-face, and we need to be advocates for our colleagues who need that flexibility. So it's about us getting vocal. I think thanks to yourselves and thanks to other colleagues, I think there's quite a few of us that have got a little bit more vocal this year, haven't we? And it's maintaining that energy, isn't it? Because it may not be ourselves that needs it, but there will be other students, other colleagues in practice who need that flexibility and who have always needed that flexibility in the longer term. So I think we need to, it's like being mindful of what you say, really, isn't it? It's being mindful that we don't say, face-to-face is better than digital. It's little things, isn't it, within conversation that can actually be ableist. So I got on my horse then, sorry, I'll get off my horse.
It's a great horse, Thank you.
I think on that point, I think Hannah made a point earlier about what was it, Rachael? It's gone out of my head now. But someone made a point. Someone made a point about maintaining identity within the different groups as well. But obviously, there's a lot of intersection and happening anyway. But at the same time, actually, I think this is the point that you made, Hannah. We have to also encourage our allies to step up, because there's more of them than there is of the people whose voices are being heard, and you don't want the same voices being heard all the time, because it does get tiring. It does, because if I burn out from talking too much, then who else is going to talk? Because there's no one behind me. So it's about that advocacy and sort of and then this is when we want to look to the RCOT, because they have that kind of ability to reach more people than we would ever will. I think my friend Brock Cook from the Occupied podcast talks about how occupational therapists make really rubbish influences because we're quite good in masses, but individually we probably burn out quite quickly, which is because we're so passionate about whatever topic that we're chasing. So we go all out, and then and it goes dead quite quickly again. So so we really do need to reach out for our allies and people that to sort of join the movement, join that community that we all want to create, and be able to advocate for all the things that you are very much interested in. I know we can't advocate for every single thing, but anything that you're interested in, just get them allies to do a lot of the work, so that it doesn't fall onto one or two people to be doing it. Because when one of those two people decided they don't want to do it anymore, then that cause sort of stops quite quickly, and that's not good.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I think that moving into action is what's going to help with reducing the burnout, because then you can gather a collective of allies and peers together to share the burden of the activity. Because when I've done more than 20 odd. I haven't done this many presentations, and a lot of it is free labor, and I'm stopping that free labor now and asking for money, because it really did affect my mental health, because I was just constantly re-traumatizing myself with every conversation, with every presentation, and it was a lonely place to be, because there wasn't anyone else beside me while I was doing these presentations. And actually, when I started saying, like, I've said this now 20 odd times and there's no action, and now what I do is I ask for action, and then I'll follow it up, or I'll create the action and then collect people to come with me, so that I'm not doing it on my own. And I think Archot have the resources and funding to do this on a bigger level, and they should be doing this work on a bigger level when it comes to equity and justice. I know there's been a recent person appointed for the EDI, is that right?
Yeah.
So again, that person is on their own. So we have to be careful not to burn that person out when they're on their own in the organization. They do need to have people with them as well as a group, because that's another thing that happens to EDI personnel who are hired, who are of BME or underrepresented groups. They also burn out because there's so much burden on them to do the big work. And actually that is a big ask for any one person, regardless how much you're paying them. It's got to be a bit more thought through about the support that person needs as well. So action is really important. Action is what will take the edge off the burnout of just talking and talking and talking. It's important, the action. I keep saying that now, we need action. We can't just keep talking about it. We have the data. It's all in black and white in those pages. There's been enough government reviews. There's been enough, local level organization data collecting. And it's all saying the same thing. No justice, no equity. no justice, no equity. So we can get in lots of Black and brown faces into organizations, as the Health Observatory has found, and also the RES data saying there's lots of people from different backgrounds coming in, but they're not progressing up the ladder. They're not progressing up the ladder. So you get, you know, what is it that person said? Male and pale as you get further up the ladder is what the person, Anton Emmanuel, says from the RES, you know, but we need to change that. So we're getting people in, so we're doing something good at that point, but we're not sort of carrying that through the whole career journey. And it's the same for students coming into university. We've got lots of BME students applying, getting into university, but the dropout rate by the time they get to graduation is eye-watering. There's a leaky curriculum and they fall through it. So what's happening? You know, what's happening to career, what's happening to the leaky curriculum. So we have to keep looking at what's happening and keep changing, because that responsiveness of a organization, of a service, is what will create justice and equity. So we have to keep our eye on it all the time, and not just a one-off, oh look, we've got, you know, so many people through the door, and then nothing happens. They get through the door and then we lose them. So action is really important. Constantly looking at what is the change action we need to do next is really important. So I'm going to go on to the next question, which is our last question of this evening. And the question is, what is the change you want to see in place if we were to meet again this time next year? What's your wish list? I'll go to Natalie.
Oh, you put me on the spot because I've just arrived. Okay. My personal wish list, I'm going to give you a wish list, 2 different wishes. One for the disabled community and one for the BAME community. These are coming from my perspective as a student. I would like to see an anti-racism module brought in for all first-year students, because I have seen racism in my cohort towards my colleagues, and I don't like it, and it upsets me, and it upsets my BAME colleagues, and I think that's absolutely disgusting, and it's despicable that we have students coming in as OTs and they don't necessarily recognise that they're being racist. And why is that? Why are we not being taught what is racism, pure and simple? Why can we not be told, actually, some of the wording, some of the language we use is racist and it's wrong? If we've taught this, people will recognise it and they will understand how to behave, how to be a better OT, how to be a better human being. That's something I would like to see personally. And I think that's something that should be brought in for all health professionals, because every person who's a health professional is dealing with human beings, and they should know how to respect human beings. And also, as a disabled student, the change that I would like to see is that on placements, I would like there to be more support, that when you're on a placement, that there's a way of checking in, you know, that you have when you're on in a job, you have occupational health to support you. A student doesn't have that. So if you go to a job and the facilities don't suit you, you haven't got anywhere to go. You just are stuck with that rubbish chair and that rubbish workstation, and you just have to suck it up. And there isn't anything that you can do about it. You're stuck there for that part of your placement, and you haven't got anywhere to go. You just have to deal with it. I'd like there to be something, or somewhere that you could go, or something you could do to ask for support or some help, to do something. I don't know. That's my wish list as a student OT. And I don't know how feasible that is, but if it was possible to make those things happen, then that would make my life and a lot of other students' lives a lot better.
Thank you, Natalie, for taking that up, even though I put you on the spot, very clearly articulated. Thank you very much. Sam, over to you.
Yeah, putting us on the spot, aren't you, tonight? I guess my points would be really brief, so I'll probably think of 3 points. I'd expect pronouns as for us not to have to ask for that or prompt people. So that's you know, for us all throughout the profession, whether it's a conference, a meeting, whether you're presenting, that pronouns, we shouldn't have to ask people to do it. So I've had to add mine tonight because I didn't, but I've been making a point because I can see it matters. It really, really matters to some of our colleagues. So I think that should be a standard. I think Nat's point about anti-racism trainings, really how to be anti-racist is really important as well. And I think from accessibility, like I say, there's just this whole digital movement that's occurring at the moment, and I'd like to see I'd like to hear of role models and to hear of this flexibility in terms of careers and day-to-day work practices for occupational therapists. I'd like to hear that as a little bit more as a normal narrative, rather than people either colleagues either losing their jobs or not finding work because of challenges they face within the work environment, and the work environment not being set up to help them. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Kirsty, can I go to you next?
Yeah, so obviously echoing what Natalie and Sam have said, and kind of expanding on that as well in terms of it would be great if every single occupational therapist that was an RCOT member could be using pronouns everywhere that they are. That would be perfect. If you're doing an open day and you're introducing yourself at the beginning of your talk, can you introduce your pronouns as well, and just make it visible that this is something that as a profession we are passionate about introducing. And sort of alongside the training that Natalie said, I think sort of anti-discriminatory practice as a whole needs to come in, especially anti-ableism as well. We're working with disabled people and we're coming out of university ableist. That is not, it's not good enough. So we need to be supporting our students, and then supporting our students to support our practitioner colleagues to make changes as well, because that is how things kind of do feedback. I think is, we teach students the ideal, they go out, they see the world isn't ideal, but they try and change it, but they don't get the support necessarily from universities to do that. And I'd like to see the universities have a much stronger role in actually pushing that forward as well. So I think, recruitment processes and supporting students on placement to provide best practice. That would be mine.
Thank you, Kirsty. Woo. Some good stuff coming out so far. Hannah, how are you going to top that?
Well, I don't know that I'm going to top that. First, I guess I'd like to pick up on the pronouns thing, because I'd like to clarify as well that I don't think it should ever be mandatory that someone adds pronouns to their signature or their introduction or anything like that. We talk a lot about pronouns. We have done recently, and I've highlighted that myself. But what's really important is knowing why you're doing that. So for a cis person to be adding pronouns to an email signature or an introduction to themselves, they're creating the space where a queer person, a trans person, a non-binary person is safe to be their true self. So, for example, a couple of years ago, I wouldn't have added my pronouns because I wouldn't have felt able to add my authentic pronouns, if that makes sense. So we should never make it mandatory, we should never make it enforced, but we should have some level of understanding as it's a simple action that we can all do to make the world a better place for trans and non-binary people, basically. So I just wanted to clarify that, because I think the word pronouns on its own might get misinterpreted or anything like that. It's a simple action that we can all do, and that's why people are keen to do it. But going back to the question, sorry, what's the change you want to see in place if we were to meet again this time next year? I'd like to see a continued collaboration, and I'd like to see it. I'd like it to be visible collaboration. I'd like it to, you know, I'd like to know that it's happening. And I think so, collaboration and visibility. And Steve mentioned earlier joining up and aligning, and going on from that, I guess, to say not what we should be doing, but what we have done in that process. Because it is a process, it's always going to be a process, but it's a process that we've started. So let's get together in a year's time and be able to look back on what we've done, not what we should be doing, both from the ground up and from the top down. So synthesis, collaboration, visibility, that'll do.
Oh gosh, 3-word slogans, Hannah. Don't do it.
Always good at that, always good at that. I think, you know, Hannah, it's true though, that thing that let's say what we've started, it's not an end point, it's ongoing. We'll be constantly reaching justice and equity. We will never end it, because as I keep saying, waste comes into the system. Waste is racism, discrimination and oppression. And that's going to come in because there's people, human activity systems always bring waste with them, because we've got different people with different realities, with different thoughts. And it's about how the organization responds to that. How does it stop it taking root and ruining people's lives? You know, that's why it's an emergency. We need to stop harming people. And that's an important point. Let's next year say what changes have we started? Kwaku.
In terms of changes, yes, by next year, I would really hope that there's been a big shift in representation in the profession, or maybe even not representation as such, but people who have done the work are recognized as haven't done the work. Just similar to what Hannah is, that the process, how is the process done, and who's been involved. I think those people need to be highlighted as having done the work, because then other people can see them and say, well, I can do the work as well. And then that, when we talked about generating a community and allies, that can add on. I know over the last year, people have talked about being uncomfortable and being scared to make mistakes. But actually, I want a change that I would like to see next year is people who are willing to make more mistakes. Because if we don't make mistakes along the way, we will never learn. We will never learn and we never change. So I'm sure Mish's service improvement, yes, we have to be willing to make mistakes, because if we don't make mistakes, we don't know what's happening. So if we try to cover things up and make sure everything's perfect, it never is. So if you say something and you're wrong, and someone, or not wrong, but if someone corrects you, don't take it as a personal attack. Just take it as a learning opportunity to say, actually, I didn't know this before, but now I know, so it's going to help me change my practice or myself when I'm in a different situation next time. So that's a massive change that I would like to see everyone try to do. Don't be scared to make those mistakes, or don't be scared to say things because you think it's going to offend someone. If someone feels offended, okay, if they raise it, then be willing to accept that actually you might have caused offense and you're going to learn from it. But actually, don't just stop. yeah, please just say it wherever you feel, because that's how we connect as humans, right? We need to say what you feel before we can have that connection. And yeah, it's okay to disagree as well. It's another change is be okay for someone to not accept your view, but you can still be friends and colleagues with them. You don't have to dislike them because they don't like how you are. As long as you have different views and you're willing to work professionally, that's absolutely fine, especially in the professional capacity. So don't just dismiss someone because so that's one change that I would like to see our community, our OT community, being willing to put themselves out there and not scared that if they make a mistake, they're going to get the backlash of the whole community on them. Another thing as well about a student voice from a BAMEOTUK perspective, I would love the student voice to be heard more. And then given platforms to talk about their experiences or what their hopes and aspirations for the future are for the profession, because you don't want people coming into profession who don't see themselves and naturally exit the profession quite quickly. I don't want to really see that. I want those leaky holes that Mish talked about in the student life to be plugged if possible, as much as possible as well. And lastly, for everyone here, for anyone doing any sort of presentations, to be at least offered a tangible something. I don't know if it's an organization has enough money to pay someone, please at least offer, because then if the person says no, then I usually know that you've offered to pay the person, they've not wanted the money or not wanted that specific whatever it is. But to expect things for free going forward from now, I don't think is fair on anyone that is part of an affinity group or trying to advocate or be an activist. I don't think it's fair. I think paid opportunities from big organizations or organizations or an offer of something is very crucial. And that's a change that I would like to see from different arenas.
Thank you, Kwaku. I always kind of sit up and listen when you talk about human connection, because that's a thread that always comes through in your podcast about, humanity. And if we don't step into our humanity, we're not going to move forward. And I think that is such core to us working together and moving forward and making change actions moving forward. So looking forward to the next podcast that you've got out. The payment thing, I think, you make an important point, and I have raised it a few times, because, the most generous people have been the people that haven't got. So the student groups will pay me with vouchers, and I'm like, no, take them back, take your vouchers back, I don't want your vouchers. But I do expect from big organizations to show that they think this is important enough to support a person who's coming and talking. Otherwise, they're just showing that they want free labor and this is not important. We just call on whoever we want because they're so willing to share their knowledge. And I think they need to step up and say, we'll offer you money, or we'll offer you, like the student groups do, we'll offer you a voucher. I was just blown away how generous the smaller groups are and the student groups are. And I wasn't expecting it. But the bigger organizations, they want my free labor. And I gave and I gave and I gave. And I thought, actually, they're not changing. So that shows me how important they think of the topics I'm talking about. So I'm going to disrupt that and ask for payment and see what happens. Very strong and important point you make there, Kwaku. Rachael, over to you.
I guess to pick up on what Kwaku was saying, one of the things that we mention at the beginning of all of our events is we work with kind of the notion that we're all always learning, and that, people will make mistakes, people will misgender people, people will assume, you know, myself, I'm married, I have a wife, people will assume I have a husband. And as much as that is sometimes difficult, it can be slightly traumatic, people will make mistakes, and making mistakes is okay. Having those difficult conversations is good. Asking questions is good. We only learn through asking questions. But just to be mindful that if you're making the same mistake over and over again, then you're not learning. And obviously you need to address that yourself. There's only so many allowances that can be made. I think we can all appreciate that sentiment. And I guess the other thing, which again has already been mentioned by Hannah, is the collaboration aspect. I think collaboration between the affinity groups, collaboration with Archot, just the fact that I think as individual groups and as a collective, we've been able to have this time with Steve, like, boy, that's huge. That's never really happened before. And if we can sit here in a year's time and say, well, we had all of those conversations, as Mish, you said, you know, you guys had a bit of a bumpy start, but we're here now, we're together. And if we can move forward together and look back in a year and go, you know what, we've achieved X, Y, or Z, and we've done it together, then that would be a great place to be, I think.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you very much. Felt that, Rachel. Steve.
Yeah, going last, that's a challenge, because actually a lot of what Rachel has said a lot of what I wanted to say, really, and Kwaku as well. Which I think what I would say is, you know, well, first of all, not if we meet next year, it's kind of when we meet next year. I think that's the first thing I'd want to say. But, you know, I'd want to see that we were making really kind of visible progress against a co-produced, you know, strategy and action plan, that, you know, we were all clear what the actions we were doing, that co-production had taken place, and we were making progress. I think the second thing, and this is perhaps not quite so tangible, but, you know, just this sense that, you know, with the momentum, you know, I think a lot of you have talked about seeing change at Archot and a different approach, and you know, I just hope that that's much more evident, you know, in a year's time, that you know, the kind of statements we're making, the kind of work that we're doing, that you know, that people will see that is real. And I think the third thing I would say is just that, you know, that we really work on our relationships, you know, between the affinity networks and Archot, and that there's a real maturity in that. So, you know, we to this stage where we know how to handle disagreements, and we can disagree, and we can be disappointed with each other, but that's not, you know, that's not kind of, you know, we've got the tools and resources and the maturity to work through that, and you know, we're not going to be kind of tripped up whenever we have a difference in because we will, of course we will. You know, it's easy to make all the, you know, I'm making lots of nice sounding words at the moment about wanting to work in community and co-production and stuff, but, you know, it's hard, isn't it? You know, all of our experiences, that it's hard to do that. And so let's kind of recognize that, and yeah, work out how we work through those kind of issues together. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's really telling, and you know, we're all saying it to you, Steve, that you're here and you're engaging very visibly. That's a big difference. That is a big difference. That's not happened before, not once. So that's a big difference. So we appreciate that. And the thing about, we are going to make mistakes is okay. In a human activity system, that's how we learn. More so than when we don't make mistakes. We learn from mistakes. And also, even if it's difficult, we still have to move forward. We can't just say it's difficult and not move forward. That's important. And we've heard that from you, you know, it can be difficult, but that doesn't mean we can't move forward. And that's an important message as well that you've put forward as well. And like I say, you know, we've got to just show the change. And Natalie, I just felt it when you said education is not supporting the disabled student. I felt that because I'm an educator, and I don't like to hear things like that. But I know it's true. I'm not going to say it's not true. It does happen. It's ableist out there.
It's not that the universities and the lecturers are not supporting, because they are. The lecturers, and can be the most amazing, fantastic lecturers on the planet. It's just when you go on a placement, you are a student, you are there to work, and unfortunately they can't accommodate a student the same as they can accommodate you if you work there. And on my last placement, it was a fantastic placement, and I'm not going to say anything bad about it. It was fantastic. But when I arrived, I've got Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, and I've got a variety of physical problems. I did have to sit at a desk and do quite a bit of paperwork and a few bits and bobs. And I was on an uncomfortable chair in a really badly supported seating arrangement, and it was quite poor. After a few weeks, one of the members of staff left, and her setup was absolutely fantastic. It was perfect for me. So I was able to, after a few weeks, move to her desk, which was brilliant. But had she not left, I would have been stuck with this really poorly supportive chair. And I would have been in, it was a 50-minute drive each way for me to where I was based. I was in a ridiculous amount of pain after, in the end of this. I was really, really struggling, and it just was so difficult for me as a student with disabilities. I have children that have autism as well, and trying to deal with all that, it was really difficult. And it wasn't, I think COVID made it a perfect storm, because it was so difficult to find placements. So it was not easy for my educators. And it wasn't easy for my university to find me a closer placement. So it wasn't the university's fault. It was just what happened. And, my university did their best that they could. It was just what happened. And that wasn't anybody's fault. So I'm not going to blame anyone. I'm just saying that, unfortunately, the system is the way it is. And students get stuck in the middle of it. Do you know what I mean? Whereas, like, with my DSA, my disabled students allowance, I've got a specialist chair, a specialist desk, a specialist keyboard, all of that stuff at home, but I don't have that on placement. If only there was a way to have disabled students allowance, to have a setup where I could have a chair that was on my placement, that could be delivered to each placement, something like that sort of thing, where I could be comfortable and sufficiently supported, that kind of thing. It just beggars belief that at home I have to have this set up, whereas on placement I just get what I have, and that's not anybody's fault. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying that's the way the system is.
I've noticed how much everybody's talked about equity and not equality, and I think that's really important, because it's this concept of exceptionalism. We can't do this for you because we wouldn't do it for this person. And actually, we're all individuals, so we need to do what the individuals need. We know this as OTs, so why don't we do it for each other? And I think, we need to be talking about equity rather than equality a lot more. And that's all I wanted to say.
Okay, I'm going to conclude my concluding remarks to share with all of you. So, just reflecting on our discussions tonight, I can hear and feel there is willingness to change. The experience of all of us who are members of the affinity groups and who represent BME, underrepresented and marginalised groups in occupational therapy, within education work, and for service users. As Kirsty said, don't forget the service users. And we want to embed equity and justice with the changes we make. I wanted to hear more of a clearer steer from Archot, but I think I am putting too much on Archot in that respect, because we are on a starting journey. But again, the change focus has to be on equity and justice, and we have to see the receipts of the work from Archot as well. show us what you've done, tell us, advertise it. You know, we want to know. So if you've done it, share it. Don't hide it. Just share it, because we want to know. So show us your work receipts. Archot. I'm going to end with a quote by James Baldwin, rest in power. He was a key person of the civil rights movement in the USA. If you haven't read his books, I would urge going for one of his books and reading it, because it's just full of golden wisdom. And over 30 years ago, in 1989, he gave an interview to the American Masters documentary group, and it was titled James Baldwin, The Price of the Ticket, referring to Rosa Parks' situation on the bus. And he stated, and I can't do his wonderful voice, but he stated, "What is it that you wanted me to reconcile myself to? I was born here more than 60 years ago. I'm not going to live another 60 years. You told me that it's going to take time. It's taken my father's time, my mother's time, my uncle's time, my brother's time, and my sister's time. It's taken my nieces and nephews' time. How much do you want for your progress?" And I think that's important. That's why we need change urgently. We need to see start of change. And that's my worry. I don't want to be here next year and be disappointed that there hasn't been any change progress in the profession. But my hope is growing because of the Archot 2021 conference, because there are a few more Black and brown faces and persons from underrepresented groups on Archot boards, because Archot sponsored to pay one of the presenters of Disrupt OT Summit, which happened on the 7th and 8th of August, and having the Elizabeth Casson Trust that sponsors global research and financial grants for education. So there's hope. We have to keep the pressure up on our leaders and organizations so we don't revert back to the old ways, because that is the easy option. Let's all do the hard work. Let's grow the collective of change makers. Let's disrupt racism and discrimination in the profession and push forward equity and justice for all. And that includes our service users. So thank you very much for tonight. Thank you, all of you.